So my name is Allan Namu. I'm a Kenyan investigative reporter and a co-founder of Africa Uncensored. So Africa Uncensored is an investigative and in-depth journalism collective. Our goals are to investigate, expose, and also empower across Africa, really show Africa as it really is. We've been doing this for almost 4 years now, since leaving mainstream, and we're doing okay.
From this perch where tourists, guests of the Sosian Ranch would come and watch wild animals drink water in the heat.
When I joined KTN, because KTN was my first employer, I had the unction to tell, feature stories that went beyond the normal news docket, and tell them differently because I felt that that was where I was best suited. I had been watching a lot of people who worked for KTN at the time, Catherine Wambuasoi, as well as Linus Kaikai was there before, and then joined Joa Geos and all of these people. And I thought that that would be something that I'd be interested in. So I kind of fell into investigative reporting after a while of doing that. We started doing more and more in-depth stories, and then after meeting up with now Nyali Member of Parliament Mohammed Ali, who joined about a year after me, we did our first investigative project together, and we figured out that we like that kind of storytelling, and it kind of grew from there. So I learned pretty much everything that I know on the job from different investigative projects, trying new techniques, going deeper into different stories, and over time it's become one of the more rewarding sort of subgenres in my career. In comparison to many other people, my career isn't very, very long. I'm just coming up on 15 years now. But there have been many highlights. I think every single story that I've done has had a highlight, but in terms of my career, there are definitely certain awards that I've won, certain milestones that I achieved. For instance, in 2009, I won the CNN Africa Journalist of the Year award for stories that were very personal to me, stories about the post-election violence in 2007, as well as the rise of the Mongiki. Those stories in particular helped me sort of shape my own storytelling craft, so that was a highlight for me. I mean, there have been many others, but I think the biggest one, journalistically at least, has been co-founding Africa Uncensored. That's been really the one thing that I said that I wanted to do, that I worked towards, and eventually was able to achieve. There have been some stories that had a significant impact, and when we noticed that people were paying attention, it made us bolder, but at the same time it made us, I think, more careful, because the more eyes that are on you, that means that there's more people who would be willing to criticize what you're doing, more people who perhaps, especially if you've investigated them in the past, or if they're doing something that is worth investigating, are possibly going to try and interfere with your work, as they had attempted to in many instances. So it makes you more careful. It makes you more aware of the importance of your work, and the importance specifically of getting it right, as well as the importance of not having sort of like a dog in the fight in this sense. If I was to do a story about you, I shouldn't make it personal between you and I. I should be led by the facts. I should be led by what exactly the public would need to know, not by some sort of personal agenda. And that helps me protect myself, protect my team, and it also helps build a credibility for journalism generally in this country, which I think is very important.
With tensions rising over national politics and a security situation seemingly spiraling out of control,
for me, there have been multiple times when I thought, okay, maybe I've done enough, maybe I've said enough, maybe this is as far as I can go. But many times those moments come at very low points in your life, where you feel like the work, the effort that you're putting into your work isn't reciprocated by some sort of thanks or gratitude. But then again, it's a very selfish way of looking at your career, right? it's human, but it's also selfish. If I was to do what we do for thanks or platitudes or some sort of gratitude from the public, then again, it would be one of the most frustrating careers, because there's so much time spent outside of the limelight, digging, reading, researching. That's also a reward to you, because you're building your own knowledge. But there was, one time that I felt that, it's about time that I gave up, and it was a difficult period. There was impact on my own mental health concerning what I was doing, and it really led me to question why it is that I'm an investigative journalist. But emerging from that, I think I came out stronger on the other side, but also more aware of my own fragility. Running a media house that I had, editorial control over, and essentially was my and now our baby, has always been a dream of mine since possibly the first few years of having joined KTN. So it's something that was very, very long in coming. The day that I think Africa Uncensored started to take shape was, I think, in October 2011, when I sat down with one of my partners, Qasim Mohammed. We sat down, we had a coffee, and we talked about it. Now that's what, 2011 to 2019, or how many years is that? Is that 8 years ago, right? So it's been a very, very long time coming for Africa Uncensored. So I wouldn't say it was really caused by like a plateau in my career. It really just was a long-held desire. What made me jump were issues that I felt were not being addressed in the mainstream, right, to put it mildly. I felt that there was a lot of interference. I felt that the direction in which newsrooms were growing wasn't necessarily in the best interest of the health of journalism, right? So we were now focusing more on style, but not substance. Investigative journalism was consistently being fought, not just in our newsroom, but across the board. If not being actively fought, not being supported. So it's very difficult for it to grow. And I thought, look, why don't we use this moment and try and throw our hats in the ring and make a go of really trying to shine a light on what is one of the most important subgenres of journalism, right? And it just so happened that at the time we were doing this, there was a lot happening globally that also now started to shine a light on why it was important. So our first year of operation was 2016. 2016 was the year that Donald Trump got elected. There was this rise of sub-nationalism and the retreat from the values that Western Europe, supposedly stood for. The immigrant crisis was really something that we were discussing. There was corruption in different places that was now being brought to the fore. So I think that kind of disaffection from the public fed into wanting to know more and really get the facts. And that's the moment that was important for Africa Uncensored.
Stephen and his conductor will try pretty much anything to get ahead of the traffic, from technology to terrible driving.
The idea of being to take on subjects in Africa, I think it would be a bit foolish and naive of me to say that we can do it on our own. So how we're approaching it is really through collaboration with other African journalists who know their local context more, to be able to now kind of produce some sort of synergy, right? But the idea of Africa, for me, is an important one. And I think that's why, in spite of the fact that it was scary, that travel across Africa is expensive, that there's different languages, different cultures that you have to become accustomed to, the idea that we can play a part in really showing Africa as it really is was important for me. I think it should be important for every African, because fundamentally, which continent you know, if you were to look at the continents, which continent has gone through the kinds of things that Africa has gone through? Which continent has as rich a history, as illustrious a past as Africa? Which continent is dogged by as many problems as Africa has? But then again, which continent is the most beautiful? You know, that this is a subjective view. Which continent is the most beautiful? Which continent has perhaps the most diversity in terms of languages, in terms of cultures, in terms of, you know, even in terms of the age of its population? Africa is really where it's happening, right? And I'm not saying this as some sort of Africa rising narrative. Me, I'm saying it from how I see it. And it's important that each of us play, even if it's a small role, in ensuring that Africa progresses. But our approach as investigative journalists is to really expose wrongdoing, right, across the continent. Because it is the wrongdoing that has led to our characterization as this place where nothing ever goes right, which is absolutely flawed. A small percentage of people across the continent are responsible for so much destruction, you know, so much death. Every African has a story about something that impacted them that they had no control over, that was caused by leadership, that was caused by our history, that was caused by various things that, if done right, would really not stand in their way and not stand in the way of their own personal progress. So for me, that's why Africa Uncensored is important. And not just as, you know, as an organization based here in Kenya doing one thing, but as part of a collective of many other people across the continent who are doing in their own ways different things, finding solutions for water treatment, right? Really putting the environment at the forefront of their own sort of like career paths or what they do on their daily lives, finding solutions to education, challenging the status quo who would have us believe certain things about ourselves. That's important. It's really a moment for us to really start thinking about how we must liberate ourselves from many of the things that are holding us back. And I think that in some ways Africa Uncensored is playing that role. Small, hopefully in a bigger way in future.
Within a span of 2 weeks, I lost 2 people to suicide. They were not strangers. These were people I had known my entire life.
We did a series on mental health last year, and one of our reporters did a brilliant documentary on the same. We did an investigative documentary about what's happening in South Sudan and how the East African region is playing a part in that conflict. We've done stories in different parts of Africa, but I mean, like in Kenya, we did stories about how the city inspectorate, the Kanjo, are really, you know, members of the Kanjo are extorting bribes from ordinary people who are just trying to make a living. We've done stories about extrajudicial executions and forced disappearances that are still relevant today, unfortunately. So, I mean, there's a whole basket of things. I really can't pick one. It's very difficult for me to pick one. I want Africa Uncensored to really be the global standard for journalism. And I know that I can only, with my own knowledge, take it so far. I hope that we're able to grow enough for us to attract the best talent from Africa, and inculcate a culture of really truth-telling, you know, using the best sort of principles in journalism across the continent and eventually across the world. I want people to look at Africa Uncensored, not perhaps with I want them to look at it as this brand that came from Africa that completely challenged the way things are done globally and became a leader in how things are done journalistically globally.
Kuna wenye wametoroka kabisa, wamepita wanasema tunaenda Mount Kenya. Sasa sisi vile tulifikia hii mto Waso, Tuliona kama hiyo ng'ombe haiwezi fika huko, tukaamua tu kurudi. Kama waturudie tu tumalize safari moja.
The things that I've learned, yes, but I'm still learning, right? So I'm not an old man, right? I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still trying as hard as I can to do things as best as I can. So I think the one thing that I try to do on a daily basis is just try and do things as best as I can. And then from there, those other lessons kind of now just, become part of my story. I think as a journalist, it's just really important to know why it is that you're a journalist. Why? Yeah. If you're a journalist to be on TV, I'm not going to knock it. I might have my own views about it. But if you know why you're doing that, by the way, just go and do it, right? Journalism is a difficult profession because it consistently calls for you to be the best version of you, because you're calling on society in some ways to be better. You're holding up a mirror to them and telling them, by the way, this is how you look. So it's so important for us to also try and be that. And that's the hardest thing, because you're consistently going to fight your own demons on a daily basis. I think that's a thing that, people often don't say about professions like ours. You consistently have to try and be better, and you fail so many times. But as long as you want to do better, you also try and be better. Eventually that, I don't know if it's eventual, because I'm still a journalist. What I hope happens eventually is that when I look back, I can see that, at these stages in my life, these challenges I was facing as a person, I was able to overcome them, and they made my journalism better. I think the first thing actually is something that needs to be worked on both by journalists and by people who are concerned with the business of journalism, which is, how do we pay for our journalism, right? How do we pay for it in such a way that we can really retain journalism as the thing that attracts people to your newspaper, your television station, your website, your podcast, whatever, right? How do we retain that sanctity and that credibility? The way we are conducting business currently in Kenya, I think, is flawed, in the sense that we are so heavily reliant on the money that sustains the business that we forget that the business was created by the need for journalism, right? So I'm not going. It's a very long conversation. I don't think it has one answer. It's many, many answers, but that's where I think we also need to begin, right? Because once we're able to figure out a way of really retaining really the best of journalism and pay for it, that's really going to help solve a lot of problems.
It's been a very confusing day for me, where on the one hand you hear reassuring stories about how communities can come together to resolve things, but then we just come from the homestead and the graves of two brothers who've lost a mother and a son, all in the space of one evening when another community attacked them. And it just shows you that the culture of ethnic domination, of violence, especially around the issues of land and of grazing pasture, are still very deeply ingrained in the communities here.
I've had the opportunity to talk to trainers and journalists in training. It's really getting people as early as possible to practice what they're doing, what they want to do. Balance the theory with a healthy amount of practice, so that when you're joining a profession, when you get a job, or when you start your podcast, or when you launch your YouTube channel, you really have a good sense of what it is that you want to do. I think finally, one of the things that's a bit of a pet peeve is grammar. It sounds silly, but a lot more people than I'm comfortable with really don't prioritize the structure of what they want to say, spelling, those things are really important, right? So that you don't also mislead people when you're saying certain things on TV or in your paper. It's really important to really focus, and that's why books are important, so that you can learn different ways of saying things. Yeah. But then speaking more about Africa is really encouraging journalism in our own languages, right? So building Swahili as really a very big language for journalism. Because if you think about it, we have Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, the DRC, right? Parts of Malawi that speak Swahili, right? It's one of the most widely spoken languages on the continent. I should be in a minority as an English-speaking, as a journalist who produces in English, and that should happen across. We should have really strong journalism in Igbo, in Yoruba, in Hausa, in Zulu. That is going to help our people more than just technical fixes here and there. It's also speaking to them in languages that they can understand and sort of connect with.
I leave town hoping against hope that by the time that I come back, somehow the rains will have washed away any prospect of violence.
I think it's really, again, just know why you want to be a journalist. Really come to terms with why it is you want to do this, right? That takes care of your own sort of like worldview, in a sense, because you're really speaking to yourself. You're having a conversation with yourself and saying, Bilha, I want to be a journalist because of A, B, C, and D. Once you're able to really take care of that, then even the ideas about how you want to go about it become clearer. Once you understand why it is that you're doing something, that's really important. I think the second thing would be to really appreciate that, yes, journalism is aspirational by its very nature, right? So you go on TV, you're wearing a nice suit, your hair is nicely done, you're speaking to the who's who in society, you're traveling, you're doing all of these seemingly glamorous things, right? But it's sort of like a show in a sense, you understand? So look beyond that aspirational nature of journalism, where you want to aspire to be like this person because, wow, he does his things or she does her things, in a certain way. They seem to lead this kind of life. Really go to the heart of what kind of stories do you want to tell, right? How will the stories that I tell impact where I live? Don't be afraid of doing the boring grunt work of journalism. Don't be afraid of telling small stories about your community, Don't be afraid of doing that, as opposed to saying, I want to be an investigative journalist telling big stories from day one. Every story matters. So really apply yourself in that way. And as long as we are able to build that kind of appreciation for, and it's for any profession, but for journalism specifically, as long as we're able to build that kind of appreciation for it, then everything else kind of falls into place, I wish I had, something wiser to say, but like I said, I'm still learning, right? I still have a long way to go. These are just the things that are helping me. Yeah, many other people will have many other lessons to impart. But we're not doing badly. We can do much better.